Hello everyone, myself Nidhi Pandya. Good evening to everyone. Today's my topic is from myth to machine, archetypal structures, interactive narratives and evolution in mythic storytelling in contemporary video games. These are my academic details and presentation details. These are table of contents. My research question is how have the archetypal structures from the traditional myths evolved into the interactive narratives within the contemporary video games, transforming passive listening into action correlation. My hypothesis is contemporary video games function as a machines that transform passive mythic storytelling into an active play driven experience, allowing all the correlation of personal myth while both preserving and challenging the traditional archetypal frameworks. My introduction is that myth are once bound communities through the shared oral performance. Now, today, video games perform a similar culture labor but through the interactive machinery that lets the each player inhabit the myth. This shift from the passive listening to action correlative marks a revolutionary moment in a storytelling history, one that demands we examine both and its continuity and its rupture. After that, from myth to the machine. By embedding mything structures inside the interactive system, games offer an experience impossible in books or the films. Players literally walk into hero's path, make the moral choices, and now confronts the shadows in real time. Here, this machine-mediated myth making revitalized storytelling while raising new questions about the authorship, agency, and the future of the narrative itself. The power of archetypes into the storytelling. Archetypes are not just a static symbol but living patterns that games activate throughout the play. Now players do not merely observe the wise old man or the trickster, they embody and transform them. This experimental power explain why game feels the mythic even when their stories appear simple and the formulaic. Now critiquing the hero's journey as a monomyth. Now, while Campbell's monomyth remains influential, critic rightly expose its limitations. Why? That games, however, can correct these flaws by letting the players inhabit the marginalized archetypes or the experience collective rather than the solitary heroism. This critique opens space for the richer and a more inclusive mythic storytelling in a digital form. Jungian archetypes and their essence into the games. Now, Jungian archetypes gain new life inside the games where the players literally enact with the shadow, anime, or the hero. The dialectical tension here Mills described becomes a visible into the gameplay decisions that force confrontation with the otherness. This turns abstract theory into the concrete and the repeatable and the psychological work. Narrative tools that are work that focalization, granularity, and the mode of narration. Arjun Tara's hybrid focalization explains here why the game narratives feel simultaneously intimate and the authored, why the players see through their avatar's eyes yet remain aware of the external framing. And this duality creates a powerful meaning effects that traditional linear media cannot replicate. The semiotic structure of the player character. Here, the Velas model clarifies that the avatar we control is never identical with the character we feel really we are. Now, this semiotic gap here shows and creates emotional depth and allows players to experience both mastery and the vulnerability simultaneously. Now, God of War or a narrative analysis case study. Now, Cass's close reading of the God of War shows here a single game series can map an entire mythic arc. Now, Kratos moves from the rag-filled anti-hero to reluctant and the reluctant father, embodying the archetypal transformation through the player-controlled action. Temporal frames and the time in video game narratives. Now, Ziegel and Mitius here reveal that the games layer multiple temporal frames at once. Now, while players feel the mythic time passing while the real world minutes tick by. Now, this comparison and the expansion of the time intensify the emotional weight of the archetypal journeys. Ar- After that, RPGs as modern myth making. Now, RPG is its full form is role play game. Now, Craig positions here RPGs as the print era successor of the oral folklore. Players do not merely just listen to myth, but they collectively author it and forging a community and identity into the process. Now, this makes a tabletop into a live action RPGs powerful vehicles for the contemporary myth making. Now, game is designed for narrative architect. Jenkins here reframes games as a narrative architecture rather than a linear plots. Why? That players explore story through the movement and the choice. When combined with the Arce's emphasis on the simulation, and this approach explains why the mythical worlds in game feels alive and inhabited from simulation and to interactive myth. Earth here instead that simulation is the true engine of the games. When that engine powers mythic structures, players discover story that really feels alive and is authored by them and their free choices. This synthesis of the simulation and the myth marks the distinctive power of the contemporary video games. Finding the self in role playing games. Bowman here shows that how role play model games lets the player rehearse the alternative selves and life paths through the mythic play. They practice courage, compassion, and trickster cunnings, and they find their own moral choices. Now, this experience translates into the real world identity work that traditional stories rarely are achieved. My hypothesis is here justified with the proven evidence that games transform myth into the active machine mediated storytelling where player character embody layered identities through the episodic structure, and the interactive tools like the hybrid focalization and the multi-layered temporality turn the monomyth into the lived experience with the meaningful engagement. While the critics here reveal that the limits of the monomyth, they also confirm the enduring power of the archetypes in plural digital forms, showing that games shift from the myth from passive reception to the participatory experience that fosters the individuation and the narrative plurality. My lessons, which I have shown here, the digital age games restore myths' communal function by letting players co-create narratives that shapes their personal and collective identity and reduce the isolation. Here, games challenges the monomyth, fostering the inclusive and the diverse story around the figures like the heroine, witcher, and the trickster. Here, archetypes become a lived experience that helping the players achieve the individuation through the direct engagement. Here, temporal frames turn myth into the personal journeys and empowering agencies. Games just not democratize just myth making, revitalizing the storytelling as a tool for the identity, education, and the collective meaning in the digital age. The conclusion: video games have carried a mythic structures for the oral traditional into the interactive digital age, transforming archetypes from the abstract symbols into the lived experience shaped by the player's choice. Simulation, the limitation of the monomyth are challenged through the narrative plurality, hybrid focalization, and the emergent storytelling that embrace the diversity and the community. Now, players gain agency once reserved for the storytellers, becoming an active participant in the cultural myth making through the spatial and the temporal narrative system, enriching both individual identity and the collective dialogue. The machine has not replaced the myth, but revitalizing and the democratizing it, offering powerful tools for the self discovery into the digital age. These are my learning outcomes, and these are the limitations and the scope for research, which shows the exploration of the emerging of technologies like VR, AR, and I, featuring the future myth storytelling. Here is an infographic of my whole presentation. These are the reference. Thank you, everyone. Now, questions are welcome.
So, my question is, in a digital economy driven by transactions and rewards, how does commercialization affect mythic storytelling in games?
In the contemporary gaming industry, the profiters and the makers, whenever we play games, they shows the upgrades and rewards while we win the game, and purchases, which shows that myth making is kind of being dominated by the consumptions, and that consumptions are overshadowing the myth. But if we truly experience that, then even if we see the consumptions, but the real connection into their into the player and the game is still there. that emotional depth is there, and the connection of the individual choice, individual moral decisions, and how to choose a journey and how to conclude it, it is still there. So even if there are rewards and the purchases and the upgrades, we are still feel connected within the game, even if there is a consumption of that marketing. So that is my answer.
So I want to ask that in a global digital culture where players experience the same game differently, does a universal myth still exist or has it become personal?
In today's digital life, we all play games, and we play from the different cultures. Even someone is playing from Gujarat, and if someone is playing from the Kerala, their cultures are different, their ideas are different, so the thinking is different about the game and the journey. And if the journeys are different, the perspectives naturally should be the different. Now it shows that it is played, the game is played by the frequent perspective with a unique way. Now this breaks a one fixed idea and one fixed perspective of a myth that applies to everyone. Here it is instead the each player here shows a different perspective and new ideas. As a result, these myths are in a contemporary world become a diversible and flexible, not just a one fixed perspective, and it becomes a deeply connected with us. So thank you, this is from my side.